Hello, thank you for joining us for our seventh part of Does Jesus Associate with the Disinherited, Part 7. We'll be starting in Chapter 5. The religion of Jesus makes the love ethic central. This is no ordinary achievement. It seems clear that Jesus started out with a simple teaching concerning love, embodied in the timeless words of Israel. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord, and thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy might, and thy neighbor as thyself. Once the neighbor is defined, then one's moral obligation is clear. In a memorable story, Jesus defined the neighbor by telling of the Good Samaritan. With sure austerity and great power, he depicted what happens when a man responds directly to human need across the barriers of class, race, condition. Every man is potentially every other man's neighbor. Neighborlessness is non-spatial. It is qualitative. A man must love his neighbor directly, clearly, permitting no barriers between. This was not an easy position for Jesus to take within his own community. Opposition to his teaching increased as the days passed. A twofold demand was made upon him at all times: to love those of the household of Israel who became his enemies because they regarded him as a careless perverter of the truths of God, and to love those beyond the household of Israel, the Samaritan, and even the Roman. The former demand was deeply traumatized by the fact that Jesus did not consider himself as one who stood outside of Israel. If he had regarded himself as one who was starting a new religion, a new faith, then it would not have been hard to account for bitter opposition. This is from Howard Thurman's book, Jesus and the Disinherited. With justice, the defenders of faith could have opposed him because he would have been deliberately trying to destroy the very grounds of Judaism. But if it be true, as I think it is, that Jesus felt he was merely serving as a creative vehicle for the authentic genuineness of Israel, completely devoted to the will of God, then in order to love those of the household, he must conquer his own pride. Howard Thurman goes on to say, in their attitude to seem to see the profoundest portrayal of the purpose of God, it is curious that as each looked on the other, the accusations were identical. In the second place, Jesus had to deal with the Samaritans in working out the application of his love ethic. His solution of this bitter problem is found in the story of the Good Samaritan. There is also the very instructive account of the interview between Jesus and the Syrophoenician woman. Opposition to the interpretation which Jesus was giving to the gospel of God had increased, and Jesus and his disciples withdrew from active work into temporary semi-retirement beyond Tyre and Sidon. The woman spoke into his retreat with an urgent request in behalf of her child. Jesus said to her, "It is not meet to take the children's bread and cast it to dogs." This was more a probing query than an affirmation. It had in all the depth frustration which he had experienced, and there flashed through it generations of religious exclusiveness to which he was heir. What right has this woman of another race to make a claim upon me? What mockery is there here? I am not humiliated enough in being misunderstood by my own kind. And here this woman dares to demand that which, in the very nature of the case, she cannot claim as her due. This is the Syrophoenician woman. He says, into the riotous thoughts that were surging in his mind, her voice struck like a bolt of lightning. Truth, Lord, yet the dogs eat the crumbs which fall from their master's table. And so he goes on to say, go, woman, go in peace. Your faith has saved you. So, but this was not all. Jesus had to apply his love ethic to the enemy, to the Roman, the ruler. This was the hardest task, because to tamper with the enemy was to court disaster. To hate him in any way that caused action was to invite the wrath of Rome. To love him was to be regarded as a traitor to Jesus' own people, to Israel, and therefore to God. As was suggested in the first chapter, it was upon the anvil of the Jewish community's relations with Rome that Jesus hammered out the vital content of his concept of love for one's enemy. The enemy can very easily be divided into three groups. There is first the personal enemy, one who is in the same sense a part of one's primary group life. The relationship with such a person is grounded in more or less intimate personal association into which has entered conflict. Such conflict may have resulted from misunderstanding or from harsh words growing out of a hot temper and too much pride on either side to make amends. It may have come about because of an old family feud by which those who were never a part of the original rift are victims of the strained relationship. May have been due to the evil work of a vicarious tongue. The point is that the enemy in this sense is one who at some time was a rather intimate part of one's world and was close enough to be taken into account in terms of intimacy. To love such an enemy requires reconciliation. It will be the will to reestablish a relationship. It involves confusion of error and seeking to be restored to one's former place. Doubtless it is this that Jesus had in mind in his charge. If thou bring thy gift to the altar, and there remember that thy brother has aught against thee, leave there thy gift before the altar, and go reconcile to thy brother, and then come and offer thy gift. It is with this kind of enemy that the disinherited find it easy to deal. They accept with good grace the insistence of Jesus that they deal with the rifts in their own world. Here they are at the center. They count specifically, and their wills are crucial. When one analyzes the preaching and the religious teachings in the churches of his country, he discovers that the term enemy usually has this rather restricted meaning. When the Negro accepts the teaching of love, it is this narrow interpretation which is the utmost. I grew up with this interpretation. As Thurman mentioned, I dare to say that in white churches in my little town, the youth were trained in the same narrow interpretation applied to white persons. Love those who have a natural claim upon you. To those who have no such claim, there is no responsibility. The second kind of enemy comprises those persons who by their activities make it difficult for the group to live without shame and humiliation. It does not require much imagination to assume that to the sensitive son of Israel, the tax gatherers were in that class. It was they who became the grasping hand of the Roman authority, fletching from Israel the taxes which helped to keep alive the oppression of the Gentile ruler. They were Israelites who understood the psychology of the people and therefore were always able to function with the kind of spiritual ruthlessness that would have been impossible for those who did not know the people intimately. They were despised. They were outcast because from the inside they had unlocked the door to the enemy. The situation was all the more difficult to bear because the tax collectors tended to be prosperous in contrast with the rest of the people. To be required to love such a person was the final insult. How could such a demand be made? One did not even associate with such creatures. To be seen in the company meant a complete loss of status and respect in the community. The tax gatherer had no soul. He had long since lost it. And when Jesus became a friend to tax collectors and secured one as his intimate companion, it was a spiritual triumph of such staggering proportions that after 1900 years it defies rational explanation. The argument for loving this second enemy was the fact that he too was a son of Abraham. He was one of them, unworthy though he was. Here was the so-called call of blood which cannot be stilled. God required that Israel be one people even as he was one. All underprivileged people have to deal with this kind of enemy. There are always those who seem to be willing to put their special knowledge at the disposal of the dominant group to facilitate the tightening of the chains. They are given positions, often prominence, and above all, a guarantee of economic security as well as status. To love such people requires the uprooting of the bitterness of betrayal, of the hardiness poison that grows in the human spirit. There must be some understanding of how such people become as they are. Is it because they are weak and must build their strength by feeding upon the misery of their fellows? It is because they want power and recognizing the fact that they can never compete within the group for a place of significance, are thus driven by some strange inner urge to get by, cunning what they cannot secure by integrity. It is because they resent the circumstances of their birth and fling their defiance into the teeth of life by making everything foul and unclean within the reach of their contact and power. There is no simple or single answer. In every ghetto, in every dwelling place of the disinherited throughout the ages, these persons have appeared. To love them means to recognize some deep respect and reverence for their positions. But to love them does not mean to condone their way of life. Jesus demonstrated that the only way to redeem them for the common cause was to penetrate their thick resistance to public opinion and esteem and lay bare the simple heart. This man is not just a tax collector, he is a son of God. Awaken that awareness in him, and he will attack his betrayal as the only he can from the inside. It was out of this struggle and triumph that Jesus says, love your enemies, do good to them which hate you. Hence he called Matthew the tax collector to follow him. The third type of enemy was exemplified by Rome. The elements at work here were both personal and impersonal. They were religious as well as political. To deal with Rome as a moral enemy required a spiritual recognition of the relationship with the empire. This was made even more precarious because of the development of the cult of the emperor worship. But Rome was a political enemy. To love Rome, to love the Roman meant first to lift him out of the general classification of enemy. The Roman had to emerge as a person. On the surface, this would not be too difficult. The basic requirement was that the particular Roman be established in some primary face-to-face relationship of gross equality. There had to be a moment when the Roman and the Jew emerged as neither Roman nor Jew, but as two human spirits that had found a mutual, though individual, validation. For the most part, such an experience would be impossible as long as either was functioning only within his own social context. The Roman, viewed against the background of his nation and his power, was endowed in the mind of the Jew with all the arrogance and power of the dominant group. It would matter not how much the individual wished to be regarded for himself alone or to be permitted to disassociate himself from all the entangling embarrassment of his birthright. The fact remained always present. He was a Roman. He was a Roman and had to bear on his shoulders the full weight of that responsibility. If he tried to make common cause with the Jew, he was constantly under suspicion and was never to be trusted and taken all the way into the confidence of the other. Of course, the Jewish person was under the same handicap. It was almost impossible for him to emerge as a person. Always in the background was the fact of difference and the disadvantage of status. If he wanted to know the Roman for himself, he ran the risk of being accused by his fellows of consorting with the enemy. If he persisted, it would be simply a matter of time before he would be regarded as an enemy and forced to take the consequences. The more he complained his motives, the deep ethical and spiritual urgency which forced the irregular behavior, the more hypocritical he would seem. Once isolation from one's fellows has been achieved, one is at the mercy of doubters, fears, and confusion. One might say, suppose I have misread the will of God. Suppose I'm really acting in this way because I do not have the courage to hate. Suppose those I'm learning to love turn and rend me with added contempt and condescension. Then what? Does it mean that God has failed me? Does it mean that there is, at long last, no ultimate integrity in the ethical enterprise? Does it mean that the love ideal is so absolute that it viterates something as frail and limited as human life, that thus it is an evil and not a good? My God, why hast thou forsaken me? Love of the enemy means that a fundamental attack must first be made on the enemy status. How can this be done? Does it mean merely ignoring the fact that he belongs to the enemy class? Hardly. For lack of a better term, an unscrambling process is required. Obviously, a situation has to be set up in which it is possible for primary contacts to be multiplied. we're going to end there, and we will pick up the next time. May God bless you, and may God keep you. Thank you so much for viewing our ministry video on my website by way of YouTube. Please join us every Saturday at 7:30 p.m. where we will tackle questions concerning life in general from a Christian point of view. Please follow us on all social media platforms. Facebook, I have a Facebook group under Reverend Anthony Owens Ministries, and same on Twitter as well as Instagram. You can find us. You also can go to my website, Reverend Anthony Owens .info for info, and you will see information pertaining to our ministry. I pray that you will share my ministry website with your friends, your enemies, and your foes. We are answering questions that many of us have concerning life from a Christian point of view. I thank you for joining us. We will be here every Saturday at 7:30 p.m. To dialogue. I'll be chatting online, and so I pray that you will join us. Thank you so much for watching our ministry video, and may God bless you, and I look forward to seeing you next time. God bless.